Thank you to Pastor Greg, who kind of, I want to say, arm twisted. It was a last minute request that I made this week. If he'd be willing to share with us on his very last Sunday, if he'd be willing to join us this morning. We don't necessarily have anything specifically planned. However, we figured that this would be a good time to let Greg share any thoughts, parting thoughts and wisdom that he has, as well as open up for an opportunity for Q&A. So I guess, Greg, did you want to kick us off with anything, or do you want to jump right into questions that
Yeah, Jason, I'm sitting here thinking that doesn't sound at all like the conversation you and I had. The conversation was more like, yeah, would you be willing to come and just talk with folks and have another opportunity to share? I would guess, looking at the faces on the screen, you all know that this is my last Sunday here as pastor, and so I'm glad to share whatever memories you all have. I know some of you have been sharing that with me in written form, and I really appreciate that. And I know some of you put together videos that I'll get to see in a little bit, and I appreciate that too, of course. But I'm glad for this time to be our time. I feel like it is somewhat unorthodox for me to take the approach I did with the sermons throughout this month of January. And just sort of in love, lay a lot of things out there. And so I feel like I've said my piece in the truest sense of the word. And I hope that you all have also heard a lot of affirmation of who you are, who this congregation is, who this extended congregation is now, and what that's becoming. This is a special place, and I'm gonna miss it for a while. And like I've said before, I do hope to return as a congregant in the future. So I'm glad to discuss whatever you all would like to talk about today. If there's meaty things that you want to discuss, that's great. I enjoy talking about this. I'm still passionate about this congregation, about the Church of the Brethren. If there are fun memories you want to share, I would love to hear those too. This is our time together.
Greg, I'd also like to hear from you if you have any, looking back over I'm sure you've done a lot of thinking or just looking back and reminiscing over the last time. And so as we're going through today, if you had any, funny stories from your time here over 15 years, any tidbits that stick out to you as those kind of like really interesting moments throughout ministry, I'd love to hear any of those stories too.
So sprinkle them in as I recall them.
Right. Yeah. Did anyone want to start us off with any questions or comments?
Greg?
Hi, Dennis.
This isn't a question or comment, but I've been waiting 2 years to tell you a story about those matching shirts that we have, and I'm not sure this is the most appropriate opportunity. I'd like to relate it quickly, and I hope the other people online will find a little bit of humor in it. But to fill all of you in, several years ago, I passed Greg in the hall one Sunday morning and saw he was wearing a shirt, if not identical to mine, but nearly identical. And I said, "Nice shirt." And of course he agreed. And this went on several Sundays. And finally I said to Greg, I asked him where he got the shirts, and we discovered they came from the same company in England. We found the company's advertisement on I think a Delta Airlines magazine in a seat back pouch, and they're custom size shirts, and that's why we both ordered them, and we wore those shirts, of course, for a period of time. And when we were on our Rhine River cruise last summer, a year ago, we had the opportunity to share dinner one evening on the boat with two couples from Ohio. And the next evening, when Roseanne and I entered the dining room, we passed the table these two couples were at, and the guy sitting at the aisle had a shirt on that looked almost identical to mine. And I laid my arm down on his table alongside of his arm, and I said, "Did you happen to get that shirt in England?" And he said, "No, got it back home in Ohio." And I said, I told him why I asked. And I said, my pastor and I have three of the shirts from this company in England, identical prints. And we act like a bunch of typical women. On Saturday nights, one of us will call the other to see which shirt we're going to wear on Sunday morning so that we aren't wearing the identical shirt. Of course, that was an embellishment, not true at all. But, and I never did tell the guy from Ohio that that wasn't true, but he got a great laugh out of the thing. I had wanted to relate that to Greg for some time and just didn't have the opportunity. So Greg, I hope you'll think of me anytime you might wear those shirts if you still have them. Thank you.
I do still have them. Thanks, Dennis. I will. That's great.
Hi, Greg. This is Don Craybill. You know, when I think of individuals and people, I often think of a key idea or a key phrase or a snippet of wisdom that I connect to that person. And the one thing that I always think about when I get into the circumstances I'll explain in a moment, and you, is something that you said when we were, it would have been at the end of your first year when Ray Diener was tragically taken away from us. We were at his viewing or a gathering at the funeral home, and you said to a number of us, or maybe I overheard you telling his family this, but all of us grieve in different ways. And it's important to be okay about however you need to grieve. And that seems like such a simple thing, but I find it to be a profound thing that we do all grieve in different ways. And it's important for us to find the way that's most helpful and appropriate for us to grieve in a situation like that. So I'll be forever grateful to you for that little snippet of wisdom.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, and it strikes me that though it's not the depth of grief that we're experiencing now, or that I'm experiencing now, leaving the congregation, I've seen the ways that grief has been expressed to me in the different ways that and waves that I'm feeling grief as I make this transition. So that's a helpful memory. Thank you.
Greg, I'll note that there are two questions in the chat. One is curious about your new job and responsibilities. Lots of travel, ? Working from home, ? And another question just about some of the things that you did on your short Sabbath rest. Any hikes you would recommend?
Well, just to take those in order, my new position, it's at an organization called Initiative One. It's a self-titled leadership institute. So essentially, it's a consulting firm that works with individuals and with organizations, both profit and not-for-profit, mostly for-profit though, to help leaders and the organization move forward. And so it's some of it is simple things like how we communicate with one another. They have basically several books that have been written by the CEO and one of the content managers there. And it's interesting, those two individuals are former pastors themselves. And so they took a lot of wisdom that they had gleaned from church life, from, I think you could even say, biblical examples, and they interpreted it and reinterpreted it so that it was available and ready for mass appeal. So, you know, it's pretty fascinating that I've had the opportunity to work with that group a little bit already. I think most of you know, and so working with groups all the way from a tile and carpet installing company in Green Bay, Wisconsin, to a radiology group in New Mexico, to the University of Green Bay, Wisconsin athletic department. So when these organizations, either they might be in chaos, they might be having major interpersonal conflicts, they might be struggling with how to get to the next step in their organizational growth, and they get stuck. You know, I think we all know this. Organizations work for a while, and then they have a certain system that works, and then when growth happens, they bump it up into some patterns of behavior, whether they're interpersonal patterns or whether they're organizational patterns. And so what I'll be doing is really helping those organizations make that next step in their growth so that they can keep serving. The way I came to it was through a sort of a friend who knew that I had experience in anti-racism work, and that really came through the Church of the Brethren. I did that 20 years ago and have worked with that ever since. And it was with this University of Green Bay, Wisconsin athletic department that they were in a situation where they have mostly white coaches. They have a lot of African-American players, and they have an athletic director who's African-American. And so they needed a place where they could sort of put things on the table, talk with one another, learn more about, especially for the coaches, where they were at in terms of white privilege, and a place where they might be able to understand their athletes a little bit better. And so I did that, and then actually repeated that with, there's a town in, or city maybe, in Colorado called Erie. It's just north of Denver, fairly large, but they put their entire staff in the city through. Everybody from groundskeepers on up to the city manager went through that same process. It's 3 1.5 hour sessions. And so just for people who wanted to continue to increase their sort of interracial and anti-racism IQs and EQs, that was an opportunity for that. So I'll be doing those kinds of things. In regard to travel, I'm not sure how much travel I'll be doing. Some of that will depend on where business comes. If there's business in this area or drivable, I'll be doing that. But certainly if there are opportunities that take me other places, we'll do that. Yeah, so some unknowns there. That the key process that Initiative One offers for folks is actually a 9-week series where for 9 weeks, for 3 hours a session, leaders will go through this series, and it touches all facets of your life. Meaning, a lot of times we go to leadership trainings and we say, okay, this is going to teach you how to manage your inbox better. This is going to teach you how to talk to people about hard things. This is going to teach you, sort of these skills and knowledge sorts of things. This process actually encourages everybody to dig deep into who we are, and believing that leadership is more than about what you do, it's about who you are. So, if you're having a hard time relating to somebody, well, what is it in my life? Maybe even going back to my family of origin, that every time somebody says this one thing to me, it makes me mad, or I shut down, or I get sad, or, all those patterns that we have in our lives really encourages folks to dig deep. So it's interesting. It's definitely a ministry of sorts that I'm looking forward to digging into.
Jason, I have a question that might relate to what Greg was saying.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if you heard me or not. Greg, would you be working more with religious organizations and churches than perhaps other staff? Do you have a sense for that, or because of your background, or?
Maybe, but maybe not. Like I said, they have, I think they sort of took a chance on me as somebody who's a pastor. A lot of the other folks that they tend to hire come from HR backgrounds
Right.
or from other leadership backgrounds. And so because this organization was started by a couple of pastors, they knew the skills that pastors tend to have as well, and seems to be a good match for that. So they have a number of people with religious backgrounds. So I'm not sure that I would necessarily be the one working with
Right.
churches. That said, when, if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, Greg, we would love to have Initiative One work with us on something, then I would definitely take the lead just because I would be relationally positioned to work well with that group.
All right, that sounds good.
Greg, another question in the comments is, oh yeah, I never got to Marcia's question about things you did on your short Sabbath rest. Any exciting hikes or?
I don't know how exciting they were, Marcia, but I did mostly hikes that were in the immediate area. I had one planned to the Adirondacks, and I had actually been coordinating with Paula Burke's brother-in-law who lives up there. He had turned me on to some nice hikes up there, but that would have been an extended trip. I did, I think, 4 or 5 shorter trips, like to Tuscarora, which is just north of Carlisle. Went over to Michaud, which is down towards Gettysburg. And I hit different segments of some of those trails. Just tried to do loops and just tried to take a lot of quiet time. Actually, it was fruitful. It was good. I would still love to do an extended multi-day trip by myself at some point. I think that would be invigorating to do something like that, just to press myself. I haven't, as most of you know, when you have a family, you don't just spend tons of time by yourself. And that's something that I used to do a lot of. And so I thought it would be interesting to do that and just to press myself to get more comfortable with the idea of being still and being silent, I think would be fun. So that's on my bucket list. I'll get there sooner or later.
Another question in the comments, I want to actually jump down because this one kind of connects to what you were talking about a little before, but will it be unique that you bring a Peace Church heritage to this new position, or are there other coworkers with a theological, cultural background basis for that?
Yeah, I think it will be unique that I bring a Peace Church position. One of the pastors, the founder, comes from American Baptist tradition, which is, as you all know, Church of the Brethren, or I shouldn't say as you all know, as many of you know, the Church of the Brethren and the American Baptist have worked in partnership at points through the years, not so much in recent decades, but before that. So fairly close kin. And one of the other pastors comes from a more traditional, I won't say, kind of, how did he say? It's a Pentecostal background, but it's a very reserved Pentecostal background, I think is what he would say. And he has a lot of international experience, and so we have some connection there too. So yeah, there'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. One of the things that I like about the organization, though, is that actually since it's not an overtly religious organization. I think they do a good job of balancing, and not everybody who works for the group is Christian too, which I think is also healthy. So, you've got people who are learning to respect one another where they're at, and claim who they are at the same time, which is kind of a unique place societally right now. It's something that the Church of the Brethren has not been able to do real well to some degree, in terms of saying, in the good brethren practice of forbearance, which is to say, I'm here and you are there, but we still trust one another, have good intentions, and are acting in good faith, and can mutually uphold one another. Frederic, I want to come to England. Can you set me something up in England so when COVID lifts, I can come do some work there? I'd love that.
Yeah. Yes, Greg, if you can, we will. You are absolutely welcome in our home, and I'll send you our details. No problem at all.
Okay.
How about France?
Oh, that sounds good too. My French is terrible, but my Portuguese is doable. So
All
that's
right.
not too far away either.
Thank you, Greg. You're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for your note earlier in the week. I really appreciate it.
No
For
problem.
those of you who don't know, the Greens have been joining us for worship for many months now from England, and they have some connection to the Young Center as well. And so it's been great to have you all as part of worship.
Thank you.
Our true international presence.
Yeah, and we love it. We love you all there. Thank you very much. But the main connection we had first there is, of course, through Donald Cravel. Hi,
Right.
Donald.
Greg, another question here is acknowledging that COB membership denominationally within the U.S. is now below 100,000. Should E-Town COB and churches like us start thinking about a fallback position, a new kind of grouping based on affinity for beliefs, not geography? Question. Your thoughts on that?
Why wouldn't we? I think is my question. And I talked about this a little bit. You only have so much time in a sermon, so I'd be glad for some discussion in this group. For me, it's been obvious in the last 20 years that the Church of the Brethren is in severe decline. When you see the annual statistics that come out, it's a 1% to 2% loss every year, and that's painful to watch. As I've studied it more, to some degree, we take some consolation in knowing that this is not just the Church of the Brethren, that this is happening, basically at the same rate of decline in the Presbyterian Church and in the Methodist Church and in other mainline Protestant denominations. At the same time, we also know that there's some big sociological trends, and we have some sociologists on this call, so feel free to chime in, folks. But we know that, and I talked about this in a sermon too, people have less and less trust and faith in institutions. We know that so it's sometimes academically called a post-Christendom world, which means we don't count on everybody being Christian anymore. We don't count on Christianity being an overlaid effect or influence on society anymore. And as brethren, we should be comfortable with that because we've had some suspicion about that to begin with. But that also means that people aren't just going to come to church because it's quote unquote the right thing to do. And people aren't just going to come to church because quote unquote good people go to church. And so what are we going to do about that? And I thought it was really interesting that I was talking with Pastor Eric just this morning about it, actually. I thought it was really interesting that Brethren Newsline just had that as a headline: Church of the Brethren membership dips under 100,000, something to that effect. And all the years up to this, the way that Brethren Newsline has reported it was much more bland. It would always be something like annual numbers for the Church of the Brethren come in, and then you would need to click on the link and you would read down through the article and you would see that they would give the gross numbers. The membership was at this and now it's at that. There were this many congregations, now there are this many congregations. And you would sort of have to do the math and kind of see where things were. So I thought it was a good acknowledgement of reality on behalf of Brethren Newsline to say, this is dramatic. This is a marker that we need to be aware of. My opinion is that Church of the Brethren leadership in general is always trying to spin things to the positive. And I think it gives most of the rest of us a little bit of a false sense of what's actually going on. When the fact of the matter is, we are in deep trouble as a denomination when it comes to just the numbers and keeping our precious denomination afloat and And so for me, does ECOB take a fallback position? I don't know. I mean, I think that's a great question. Do we try to, I think it depends on this. This is what I'm getting to. I think it depends on whether or not the Church of the Brethren can actually, as a whole, can actually practice forbearance and the idea that we're comfortable with one another. Because here's where I will empathize with Church of the Brethren leadership, even as I sort of criticized it a little bit for not taking some of this head on, where I would empathize with them that that level of conflict has been so high in the Church of the Brethren that it's become very easy to get hyper-focused on that level of conflict. And usually that conflict is set up around conservative and liberal, biblical literalists, and those who interpret the Bible like we do at E-Town Church of the Brethren. You know, so it's set up between these polarities and just constant bickering, constant fighting. And now churches, conservative churches, many of them have decided to leave. So it's actually, I think, a beautiful opportunity for the Church of the Brethren to band together and say, hey, we're going to act like a church. We're going to act like, like I understand the church of old. And again, we got brethren historians on this call, so you all fill in the details. But where we can actually practice forbearance together and recognize that each one is coming to their faith in good faith and wishes to worship and follow the way of Jesus the best way that they understand. And if we could do that, then we could really start banding together. Then we could really start, I think, reviving the denomination and tackling what are the bigger issues, which are these societal trends that are damaging, which means we're going to have to do some things radically different. And I think it means that denominational leadership is going to need to take a much stronger role, and I think a much more active role in the life of the church. I think if you look at who we have called to leadership denominationally, usually we call a particular a person with a particular set of skills and characteristics. And typically, because the church has been in such a high conflict state, it tends to be people who want to be uniters, people who tend to be more pastoral in nature, people who tend to be more gentle, people who we think will bring the church together. Sadly, that hasn't happened. And I don't blame those leaders. I blame this extreme polarity and hostility that we've had in the denomination. I don't think anybody could have brought these folks together, because it mirrors what's going on in the country too. Like there are some major forces that we've needed to reckon with. So I think in order to move forward, we would need to have leaders who are probably a little more charismatic in nature, leaders who are probably more willing and able to cast vision, leaders who are more willing and able to rock the boat a little bit. Because if you rock the lesson that I've learned in the Church of the Brethren denominationally is that if you rock the boat, and by rock the boat, I mean propose new ideas, you are eliminated from leadership, because that's seen as controversial, and that's seen as working against unity. And for those of you who have heard this story, forgive me, but I wrote an article, and I was invited to write an article for Brethren Newsline in 2008. I just came across it in my papers as I was cleaning my office out. And in this article, they said, you can write on whatever you want to write on. It was one of the perspective pieces, one page. And I decided to write it on what I just witnessed at the 2008 annual conference. That was the 300-year anniversary of the Church of the Brethren. So if you were there, and if anybody was there, it's 2008, Richmond, Virginia. We had brethren from the three main groups that had the splits of the 1880s, and we all got together and we all mourned with one another how poorly we had treated one another in the 1880s. And we said this, there were apologies and there were tears and there were some ugly moments that happened in those 1880 splits. But what I also noticed was that nobody said, hey, you know what? We ought to get this band back together. We ought to all join together. We ought to all reunite, because what they saw was when they went their separate ways, each of them flourished in their own way. And so my thesis for that article that I wrote for Messenger was, hey, listen, we're not treating one another well right now in the Church of the Brethren. If we can't treat one another well, is it time to think about amicably going our separate ways, learning from the 1880s, not letting it get as bad as it got in the 1880s? We don't want to see that ugliness. So why don't we go our own ways now, where we can actually bless one another in ministry? That was the beginning of the end of my participation in denominational ministry, because I said that. That was the beginning of the end because I said that. And I take no satisfaction in saying, look what's happening in the Church of the Brethren. And that was 12 years ago. And we just had 5,000 plus members split off, multiple congregations, dozens of congregations split off from the denomination, and do so in very ugly ways that we've seen directed at this congregation and at your pastors. So something's not working, right? When somebody proposes that we do something like that 12 years ago and is essentially shut out, yet that happens, what's going on? I've talked a lot. I'm curious what you all think. And there are a lot of people on this call who have deep knowledge and history, decades of experience in the Church of the Brethren at the national level, as sociologists, as historians. So I've talked long enough, but push back on me if you see something wrong with my thinking, or agree or add to. I think it's a conversation the Church of the Brethren needs to have. And I'm just
totally
not
agree
sure
with
we're
you, Greg.
doing it right now. Go
I
ahead,
totally
Pop.
agree with you, Greg. If you say something sort of out of line, you are pushed to the side. I grew up in the Church of the Brethren, but someplace along the line, it left me.
Pop, somebody asked me if I was jumping ship on the Church of the Brethren, knowing that the numbers were going down, and my response was, I'm not jumping ship. I got pushed overboard.
Hi, Greg, Ed here. I'm really having been in the church for 40 years, I really appreciate what you've said here, and regrettably, I'm afraid that, the pastors we have here aren't going to take up, the wisdom you have and, guide us forward. I thank you. I don't know what we're going to do, when you leave the church, but thank you.
Well, thanks, Ed. And I would say this congregation is very fortunate that we're a multi-staff congregation, and that the other three pastors do have tremendous gifts for ministry. And I don't know exactly what will come next. I think just in terms of hiring or not hiring, but I would say you'll want to take, and you would, this makes sense. You just want to take care in filling in the gaps, because we all have different gifts for ministry. And so the places where the remaining pastors have gifts, obviously don't need to hire for, but the places where you want to see the congregation grow and that the current pastors do not have gifts or don't have time to share those gifts because they're pursuing other ministry areas, then you'll want to make sure to fill that. The good news for E-Town is that this is a congregation that is respected by many. If theologically folks are comfortable with where we're at, then they look at E-Town and they say, wow, E-Town, holy cow. That's a congregation that's doing things. That's a congregation that's faithful. That's a congregation that's not losing members like the rest of the Church of the Brethren is, by and large. And so I think you're well positioned to recruit really fine leadership.
Greg, do you plan to keep your ordination? And if ever given the opportunity, would you speak at a COB gathering or event?
Yeah, I was just in conversation with our district executive, Pete Contra, and he asked that I convey what I'll be doing in my new position, and to see if, because there's a little bit of interpretation that the district ministry commission can take just in terms of Church of the Brethren polity, as to whether something is as ordainable ministry. So my desire would be that I keep my ordination, and I'll be requesting that. But I'll need to wait and see what the district ministry commission says about that. And yes, I would love to speak at Church of the Brethren events.
Well, you have some friends on the A&E board.
Greg, maybe
Oh, we heard you, and then now we're not, Jim.
I'm what?
Oh, your sound went out for a minute.
Did it? Is it back?
It's back, yeah.
Okay, good. I certainly know what you're talking about in terms of how things happen with leadership. One of the mantras for a long time with those who were in charge of choosing who was going to be in various roles of leadership was no lightning rods. And so lightning rods were considered from all different sides of the angles. But yeah, there has always been, I think, a strong push for moderation, pastoral, middle of the road, pull everybody together kind of thing. I didn't experience your article in quite that way, but I did, as you know, use it as an illustration of some of my work of how it can at times move us away from a conversation with each other about how are we going to live together if we move too quickly into a conversation about, well, we might as well just not live together. I struggle with that because I understand the dynamics you're talking about, and I think I've let you know that there are a lot of dynamics at work in choosing who will be in leadership, and those dynamics have included your name many times with a lot of good, strong support. We got there with worship leadership at annual conference, and we're close to it in some other arenas. I expect some offers to be extended, but you know, so much depends on what we do. I think the main issue in the church, as in most any other gathering, I think this would be true of any cluster that we would become a part of, is that there is always this need for people to want to feel like things are being done their way. And I think even among progressive groups that I've experienced together, there's that,
No doubt.
there's that kind of rivalry about, you know, I want my brand to be the one that's on top. And so if we talk about just having charismatic leadership for the sake of having charismatic leadership, you know, I think we've got a charismatic leader right now in our moderator. And he has a strong vision and good at casting things. And yet he also recognizes the need to be in conversation with others who have a different perspective on things, because that moves us more in a way that more folks can be a part of the pilgrimage. But there continue to be key groups of people who feel totally disenfranchised on the right, as well as people on the left who feel that way. And so the compelling vision is the way we've been trying to say, well, then instead of us trying to figure out which of our groups we're going to follow, let's talk about how we're going to follow Jesus. And you've done that so well in this congregation. And but I'm not sure that all progressives are speaking with that voice from my experience in other quarters. So because sometimes it's the ideal that's more important than the loyalty to Jesus. And I wrestle with that within myself too. I have ideals that are pretty important to me, and sometimes have to stop and think, okay, now wait a minute, am I really paying attention to everything that Jesus had to teach us? I'm kind of all over the map with this right now, but I'm just kind of wanting to respond that we need a lot of prayer and guidance. For me, the metaphor that keeps coming back is, if I have a struggle with somebody in my family system, do I choose to not be family with them anymore? Well, generally what we do, I think, is determine who it is that will be our closest family, and that's our immediate household. But we continue to find ways to be family otherwise. Like you said, the old brethren groups that no longer are one household together, but still have some sense of, okay, we're part of the family reunion. How do we work at all of that? Because that's the key reason why we've dropped below 100,000, is that we've lost, several dozen congregations to the splinter group. That group wanted everybody to do things their way. Some of the rest of us wanted them to do things our way. And how do we determine who's the one insisting on having things be done their way? Becomes kind of a quandary and a thing for prayer.
Thanks.
So it's important things to think about and talk through. And I've always, as I've told you, have always appreciated how helpful your insights have been, not just to me, but I know that our General Secretary and our moderator-elect listen in on our service, our discussion, and find a lot of helpful things there. Now they listen in to very conservative groups too. I mean, we've got to have our ear to the ground all over the place, but it's been very helpful. And a lot of times I hear you quoted in our meetings. So it's there, it's just not visible in the way that it might have been if we didn't have strong convictions.
Yeah. And Jim, I would not disagree with you on any of that. I think what I would love to see us work towards in the Church of the Brethren is a place where I think you said it without saying it. But what I'm hearing you say is that so often we get the framework that the arguments happen with and around is around matters of biblical interpretation and theology. And I think that's when leadership gets torn. Are we going to do it this way? Or are we going to do it this way? I would love to see us switch our framework and our way of thinking to say, hey, folks, we're all in a sinking ship together. Now, how are we going to respond together so that we take the best ideas and the most faithful approaches to ministry? And I know faithful is a loaded term, but bear with me, so that we can self-perpetuate in a way that we can really live out and shape the world around us. And I know that Paul and I, our current moderator, don't see eye to eye theologically on everything, but I have so much respect for him, even just knowing his pastoral ministry background. And I always wondered, it was always really interesting to me that someone like him was not called to leadership as moderator, but also as a general secretary, in key hired positions as well, because I think he's the epitome of the kind of leader that we've shied away from for whatever, I don't know, whatever the reasons are with him. Maybe he was offered and declined or whatever, but it's just interesting that leaders like that, and not charisma for the sake of charisma by any means, but I think in the Church of the Brethren, we have suspicion about people with charisma. Like when somebody charismatic gets up, whether or not we agree with what they're saying, we're kind of like, oh, I don't know about this person. They seem a little too slick. They seem a little too good. And so we're going to kind of like push them off to the side a little bit, which is to our own detriment. It's just to our own detriment. So it's fascinating. And again, it's part of our polity. It's part of who we are, where we tend to sit back, and I see this congregationally as well as denominationally. We tend to have what I think can sometimes be a naive or overly idealistic view that ideas will just swell from the body and implementation of those ideas will just happen, when I think that oftentimes it does require somebody or some group that's more of a visionary force that helps people know where we need to go before we get there. Of course, we're not talking about these people plowing ahead and trying to manipulate people. We're talking about people naming what it already exists that maybe other folks aren't seeing yet. One example I'll pull out, because it's as I was thinking about some of the successes here at E-Town during my 15 years is our peace, service, and openness to all slogan, whatever we want to call it. You know, that was not something that
Extra
was
yogurt.
put through the meat grinder of congregational decision making. It came out of our communications committee, and so that was a group of lay people, of pastors, and others. And then it was an idea. It was finely tuned. Information was sought. It came together. We got feedback from the board and from other congregants, and then it was sort of rolled out. And it was one of those things where the congregation by and large said, yeah, that's right. That is what we do. That is who we are. That is where we're going. And has really become a rallying cry for who we are. So it's just interesting to see how some, you know, it's not one of those things that where we said, we're going to have a congregational study and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And we tried to find a way that appeased everybody in a big 100-person meeting to come to exactly the right words and everybody, you know. So it's fascinating. I would love to see us as Church of the Brethren, and I think what we need is an increase in trust with one another. That's not there, that we would need to work at denominationally, so that we could have leaders who we would trust to actually lead us forward in some ways. Again, we're not talking Lone Rangers.
Yeah, and Greg, just to respond, we had the exact same thing happening denominationally as in this congregation way back when we had that hired that group to come in and talk with us about who we are, and we came up with the continuing Jesus, you know, continuing the work of Jesus, peacefully, simply together, and that has resonated. It came from outside, and that is amazing for a group that's been so focused on it's got to come from the grassroots, for it to have come from outside and been so embraced.
Yeah, good.
Compelling Vision followed a similar pattern and was hopeful the wording would be there, but unfortunately we had huge segments who said that unless it addressed our arguments, that it wasn't, they weren't going to, you know, feel like it really did anything except try to put a Band-Aid on the wound. That if it didn't take us, yes, we're going to be totally opposed to same-gender marriages, or we might allow it if we didn't go either way on that with this statement. So it's a quandary how you know how we are going to deal with that still.
Yeah, and somehow we got to get past that. I mean, that's somehow we got to get past things as issue oriented and more towards missional in nature. You know, this reminds me, and I want to leave a little bit of time here to get other questions in, but this reminds me of an exercise that we do in our Inquirers class, which is kind of a new members class for those of you who don't know. We talk about how we view ourselves as congregation, and what we do is I draw a box on a whiteboard, and then I put dots for people. Those are the individuals, and I say, this is what the Church of the Brethren polity and way of understanding congregation used to look like. If you're not in the box, you're not part of the community. And to be in the box represents what we think about different issues. The box represents what our official statements say. That's the box that you must live in. Well, somewhere along the line, and we'll just, for the sake of communication, we'll say progressive churches, liberal churches decided, hey, we don't need this box. And so we blew up the box and we said, you can be wherever you want. And I just put, you know, the next slide, if you will, is dots just all over the box, all over the whiteboard. There's no box, and you can be whatever you want to be. You can be who you are, and you can do whatever you want to do. Well, that's nice in theory, but then the problem becomes, and I think this is what really propelled this congregation forward 10 and 12 years ago, was that we realized that unless we had some unified sense of vision and purpose, then it's a nice idea that we can all just be wherever we want and we're going to accept everybody. But unless we narrow that down, we're not going to be able to do anything collectively together. And so sort of what we proposed in the way that we've been functioning is then I draw sort of a dotted circle or square. And that's where most of the people in the congregation are at. And that's not saying that if you're out of the circle, or you're not allowed to participate like it was in the old Brethren days, you're going to be shunned. But what it's saying is, we'll respect you for being there, but this is the way we're going. This is what we're doing. And you can apply that concept to an issue. You know, you can apply it to the lightning rod issues like same-sex weddings. There are people in this congregation who aren't so sure about that, who disagree with that. And we respect that. But Pam still did a same-sex wedding. And I was there and I participated too. That's okay. And I think we've come to a place where we said, this is what we're going to do. We all might not be there on every single issue all the time. But if you're part of this congregation, you recognize you're there enough of the time that you can feel part of this body and part of this community of faith. And that's what I would love to see us get to as the Church of the Brethren, a place where we do that, where we don't have to agree on everything, but we agree on enough that we could actually move forward, and that we're operating in this sphere of ministry rather than trying to connect the dots all the time, which is what it feels like we've been doing. And again, that's not a critique of leadership. It's hard. And those factions have been forcing us to try to make those decisions. And I think sometimes, to use the family metaphor, sometimes, Jim, you just let the family member go and hope they come back. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And when there's abusive behavior, you don't tolerate it. And we've certainly seen our fair share of that too. And you draw those boundaries too. So, all right, sorry. We've got about 8 minutes here. What are you seeing, Jason? What do we need to hit?
I think an interesting question, maybe as we look at your office behind you, your empty shelves, as you've been cleaning out things, I like this question. Are there any things that sparked joy that you came across, or any?
So much.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my goodness, where do I start?
And didn't throw out anything that was like, oh, any tidbit of
oh man,
you came across, you're like, oh, I forgot about this, or this has a good story to it.
Well, I believe it or not, I'm not a terribly sentimental person, but I have kept most of the cards and notes that people have sent me through the years. I would just throw them in the filing cabinet and just think that I want to return to those someday. So I did go back and I was reading through some of those. The ones that hit me the deepest were the ones from the kids. It's neat to see the way the kids have grown.
To confirm what Greg said earlier this morning, Carol and I also got the impression of exclusion. At annual conference, every year they give a sheet of paper to give suggestions for future conference speakers or moderators and so on. And for the last dozen years, Carol and I have both been listing Greg Lazakovich for a conference speaker, but it hasn't happened.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. It's to go back to see the way that the kids have grown up in the church, and some, when you're talking 15 years, like I'm now doing weddings for kids who were in grade school when I came, and that is just awesome. That is so neat to see, and to hear about just the privilege of some role that I've played in their lives. It's really humbling to know that and to see that. This will provide some comedic relief here at the end. One of the things that I threw in there was an exercise that I think a Sunday school class did, and what they asked the kids was what's one thing you like about church and what's one thing you don't like about church, and this is pretty funny. One kid says, I like the stories, I don't like walking up the stairs. I know this is my favorite. This kid says, I like Sunday school, sermon could be a little shorter. I like how the church teaches us. I don't like how long it is. So you're picking up on a theme here, right? It's pretty funny. So I think the Sunday school teacher thought that I would appreciate it, which I do. I like how you can get stuff at children's time. I don't like how I have to come every single Sunday. I like how open we are, but I think that things could be a little shorter. So things like that are just really, really precious. If you watch the video that I did, I also did, I was going around the office and I was showing some of the things, and one of them was the basketball tournament that we participated in that was so much fun in Atlantic Northeast. That's since, kind of the sad part, shadow side of that is there's no longer the number of teams that we need to make a tournament like that go. So that got discontinued at some point, but we had such really good times of bonding and memories there. Yeah, those are a few that come top of mind for me.
Greg, do you hear me? Sandy here.
Hi, Sandy.
One of the challenges I have for you is you took a group of us to Washington, D.C. to visit congressmen, and you seem to really be in your element in that environment. You weren't upset that the congressmen were not there, but we met with representatives. You were such a great leader in that you left others share their stories. You could have done the whole spiel yourself, but you really opened it up. I challenge you to, when you can come back to our church, to do that, not just for the young people, but for us older people too. It was 20, 30 years since I had been to Washington. And, it just got me into writing letters. I've never been more active in contacting my congressman as I have been since then. So I challenge you to put that on your to-do list as a volunteer when you come back to the church.
That sounds like a lot of fun to me, Sandy. Thanks. I'm glad I hope you're on a first name basis with Representative Smucker now.
I don't think he wants to hear from me anymore. Sorry. He's tired of it.
Well, don't give up. Don't give up.
Well, Greg, I think it's comforting for all of us to know that even though this is your last day when leadership here in this ministry, that you are going to be around. You'll be in the town. Your family will still be here, and so while our relationship as a church body with you may be a little different for the whatever foreseeable future, I think there's comfort in us knowing that you're present and around, and we really look forward to the ways in which we can partner with you in the future. And so I think this is going to be challenging. I mean, this is new territory for you, right? I mean, to kind of be present but not be present, and you have the the capacity to understand the importance of those relationships, and yet I still know that it's probably going to be awkward and challenging to some degree. And so just to extend our love to you, and today's service, we'll be thinking a little bit about you and your service here, and then of course after the worship service today, we invite everyone to hang around. We're going to be honoring Greg in some fun ways, in some silly ways, in some serious ways. And Greg, we got a lot of videos in for you. So, I remember one Sunday I was like, we got one. Well, we got a lot more than one. So y'all are gonna have to stick around and hear some of the words that were shared for one another. So.
Well, and Jason, just to follow up on the first part of what you said, you all have had profound impact in my life too. And I appreciate that, and in my family's life. So thank you for everything that each one of you on this screen has done for me and with me. I'll always remember the times in ministry that I've had here, that we've shared together. And so I thank you for that. I thank you for the love and the support. And I'm glad the story is not ending here. That's a really wonderful part about how this is working in this case. Usually a pastor leaves and they go on and they may never come back, but maybe once for a visit or twice for a visit. So we'll have the opportunity to continue our relationship together, which is pretty special. So thank you for who you are.
Well, thank you all very much, and we will see you tuned in hopefully at the live stream, and remember to stick around after worship for our celebration of Greg. Take care, everybody.